Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And
I just blew up that game fuel all over my desk.
So this is the highest rated one so far.
I'm going to short circuit my fucking keyboard. That's cool.
You got a really nice one, too.
Not really.
Well, nicer than my built-in laptop.
But now
one.
everything's going to be fucking sticky and smell like yellow because we're tasting yellow flavor today.
I thought you were doing blue next.
I never committed to any flavor next. Blue will be the last one.
Okay.
But for now, I need to wipe this up. So it's a whole
keep an exciting, yeah. What
if I find out this is actually like the best way to clean your electronics?
I wouldn't be surprised. It like bleaches them, but I don't know. The letters might come off your keys.
That's actually they won't because they're see-through, so the green light can go through and illuminate.
I told you had a fancy ass keyboard.
But it's not. It's like a budget fancy-ass keyboard. All the money went into the lights.
Yeah.
The one light, the one green light. God damn, that got everywhere. Holy fuck. Oh, Jesus.
Today, Ben
I had this whole fucking
Mountain
intro
Dew
planned.
TNT.
I just wanted to say my name and tell people who I am, and fucking Mountain Dew couldn't let that happen. Could they? Now my desk looks like I pissed all over it. And it tastes like shit.
Yeah,
God damn it. Yeah. I fucking hate these.
So far, so if you haven't listened to the prior 3 weeks, Ben got a case of Mountain Dew Game Fuel because he's an idiot. And it comes with 4 different flavors. He's never had it before, and he's been trying a new flavor each week. And so far it
hasn't worked. So far, no one's won.
No.
And now all my shit's everywhere. It looked like I pissed my pants.
I forget what the yellow one says it is. It's just like tropical or something.
Everything is a fucking charged, which just means there's way too much sugar in it. And it's tropical strike.
Yeah. Strike 3, baby.
And there's no reason this should have blown up because, again, they're not carbonated. So someone just overflowed this shit.
It was very exciting. You know, we take for granted we've been doing this show or a show for probably 10 years now, and which is sad. But so we take for granted this is Mountain Dew Game Fuel Yellow Tropical Strike Thunder, whatever
Brought
the fuck
you
you
by
just said.
Amped. Carry the 3.
But this is its first appearance on our show, and it was just nervous. It kind of, it did one of those things. It just tried to say hi, but it just all over.
And then it dropped a fucking slur, and now its career's ruined. Because it was trying to be funny. It was trying for shock laughs. Instead, it just offended me.
And it's gross. I think, I don't know.
It's on my controller, too.
Yellow might be my least favorite of the flavors, and it pretty much I asked you like what they said, but their flavors are pretty they're more labeled.
I've just
green,
been calling
yellow,
them by
blue.
their colors.
Yeah, because that's really how they're branded. Like the flavors,
and that's mostly how they taste. They taste like the colors.
And we talked about green is pretty gross because it's like flat Mountain Dew, just a little extra sweet. But I think I hate yellow more than green. Like. I don't know. It's hard.
I definitely don't hate it more than green.
It's kind of like trying to rank if you would rather be kicked in the left testicle or the right. Like they both just suck. Like,
I think it's weird. I think this is probably more drinkable than the cherry one.
And that's
as far as like I can't like cherry has a really like strong flavor. That's probably better
sweet.
than this, but it's just stronger. So it's not something I particularly enjoy.
And I've said it every week. I only drink them mixed with alcohol, and I think the cherry mixes better with alcohol than the yellow does. But I suppose you might be right if you were just drinking them straight, that the red would probably be.
Well, like it's between these two. It's red and yellow. Red kind of like neither one tastes great, so I probably want the one that tastes more watered down.
Yeah.
But they're still better than the green one. That's still bottom of the barrel. I would probably give yellow the edge over cherry. But I can't wait for this to be over. Because these fucking suck. And they ruined my pants. Anyway, this isn't just a Game Fuel review show yet. There is an orange flavor, but it didn't come with my variety pack, so I'm going to assume it's dead last. I
don't know if I've had the orange.
Because most orange flavors are.
I've noticed more and more often orange is mango and not orange flavor, like the fruit orange. And I'm not the world's biggest mango fan. Like, I can dig it in some things, but usually I think things that are mango flavored are too mango forward. So.
I like mango. I agree that, like, in drinks and stuff, like there's a mango monster flavor out there that I liked at first, and then it's just like, this is a bit much. But yeah. But Monster is way better than this Game Fuel shit. So far.
My favorite is seasonal, and it's the plum Red Bull. Like,
that's a good one. Yeah, it was like their winter edition like 2 years ago,
and it
or
was
something.
So fucking good, and I'm mad that it was a limited edition.
I think you can still get it online, but yeah, tune in next week with the thrilling conclusion of this fucking mess when I drink the blue one and we decide once and for all, why did I buy this shit? Anyway, but we don't just review that. We tell each other stories. That's actually the main point of this show.
Yeah. It's good that we start with our weakest foot every week with just random, like, not what our show is, banter.
But to be fair, I thought this was a good way to, like, structure these openings.
I like it.
Because otherwise, this is 7 minutes of bullshit. When we don't have
usually
a plan,
we do 20.
It turns into like 15 minutes of rambling. Next thing you know, we're trying to solve the healthcare crisis. And like we have no business doing it.
Yeah. So
I'd rather just rake in that sweet Game Fuel money.
So last week you had not one, but two different stories of exorcisms. And
of exorcisms.
I was going to say, I type up the, and they're like 3 sentence long, like synopsises of the show for where we post them. So it's not like I'm typing a big article or something, but I had to type the word exercise, like as in demons. And then I made, of course, the stupid, easiest exercise, like workout joke too. So I had to type both those words like 6 times each between that and the tweet. And I never spelled either of them right on the first try once. Like, I don't know what it is about they're not difficult words, but man,
they're too similar.
But it wasn't that I was mixing up like the E and the O. Like, that's the difference between the two. It's like, I just can't spell exercise. Like, I just can't do it. But, and I can't even explain how I do it wrong because it makes no sense. It's just one of those words that my brain refuses to straighten out. But, anyway, so you did that last week. My story this week has absolutely nothing to do with that.
Oh, good.
So I'll just,
You are always the master of segues.
But it is a topic that we like. It involves pirates. So, I'll just launch into it.
Okay.
So for weeks, Owen and his crew had sailed along the busy trade routes off the coast of Spain, before continuing further south along the waters of Africa. Staying just far enough away from land to not gain too much attention from, patrolling warships and the ports that they passed along the way. They had managed to come across and plunder a pair of small ships, although these waters were generally frequented more by the crews just like beginning their voyages. If you look at the old seafaring maps, they'd leave from Europe and kind of head south down the coast of past Spain and the Strait of Gibraltar, I believe that's right. And, on past Africa before either, rounding the Cape to head east or heading west towards, the Americas.
So, we've talked about it before, but geography is already not my strong suit. And to do it via audio, my eyes are rolling back into my head.
They're in the water somewhere.
Okay, there's water. I got that far.
So my point is, they started out at the beginning. This is more where you more frequently come across ships that are leaving on their journeys, which isn't necessarily what you want to plunder as a pirate. There are some that are returning to port, but it's not necessarily the best idea to attack ships like close to your own home port, because it makes it very easy to track you down as well.
Or it's a perfect crime.
Yeah.
Right,
it wasn't us.
Or their nose. Their noise.
Their noise. Yeah.
Right under the noise.
You wait till they get drink. God, neither of us can talk today.
Good thing we have a medium for people with our skill set.
Yes, damn. We're so good at this. Yeah, fuck it. I'm just going to abandon that thought altogether. So as they drew closer to the equatorial waters, at a spot near present-day Liberia, which, like you said, I'm sure you're very familiar with that on the map, they swung their sails and turned west, stalking the open expanse of the Atlantic that stretches between Africa and South America. I think we can all at least picture that. Here, there was a much better chance of coming across ships loaded with goods from the southernmost regions of the Americas, as well as an opportunity to intercept ships coming back north after rounding Africa's Cape of Good Hope, full of Indian and Asian treasures. The area provided a lot of opportunities for a pirate crew, like the one that Owen was part of, but it also meant dealing with strong weather that often turned the beautiful blue seas into churning currents of violent winds and crashing waves. God, I got too fancy there with my words.
Intimidated by your own notes.
Oh, yeah. I'm such a good writer. Humble brag. Oh. Owen had taken to sea life by way of piracy from a young age. He'd quickly learned that though life on a ship was hard and dangerous and uncomfortable, the labor paid much better than any of the random jobs he was able to find on the streets of the small English town which he was born in. By the time he was 30, Owen had definitely seen his fair share of, I guess we could call it adventure. Harrowing battles, deadly storms, shipwrecks that had left him stranded in all sorts of locations. But he'd always been lucky enough to survive, and despite his many bruises, scrapes, broken bones, and worse, he'd also managed to avoid arrest, a fate that generally meant certain death if you were a pirate. They weren't very lenient to pirates back in his day. This is 1700s.
Which
the golden
bullshit.
age of piracy. I know. They should have caught you and been like, you're under arrest for being too fucking cool.
Well, it should have been like how it is now, where it's like, hey, you're a hacker. Come work for the government. Although in some cases it was. We've talked about privateers before. That's basically what they were. But until like your own country got sick of you, and then they're like, just kidding, you're a pirate. To be fair, there were some pirates who were genuinely like amazing at what they did, and some were just, fucking
We've talked about some
assholes.
of those. Yeah. However, as grand and as amazing as some of his adventures had been, it was the current trip that would leave him with the most unbelievable story, which would also become his favorite to tell. It was the early part of September, and his ship was still patrolling the waters off the central Atlantic. In addition to the 2 early scores that they had gotten off the coast of Africa, they'd managed to capture and liberate the cargo from a handful of smaller ships. All in all, it wasn't a bad run, but it wasn't, a great run either. And pirates always want the big score.
Mm-hmm.
Why bother for the little stuff? Given the time of year, the weather was becoming more consistently dangerous. Not only were the storms more frequent, but their winds grew more violent and often persisted for days at a time. So as Owen was patrolling the decks of his ship, he watched the clouds forming off in the distance. He and everybody else aboard the ship could see that this storm was going to be a bad one. But Owen also noticed something else. A ship barely visible, with just the tops of its 4 masts poking above the haze of the horizon. So 4 masts, it was clearly a large ship, and judging from its location and apparent direction, seemed to be headed northeast, away from the southern reaches of Brazil. Present-day Brazil, I don't know what they called it back then. It was probably
back then it was probably some fucking European colonists being like, ours. It's called ours.
Pretty much. Or just like the Badlands, like, oh, that's where we've talked about all that before too. not a glowing moment in history.
We call it Spain too. The reckoning.
Right. So you knew it was probably a Spanish ship, and it was likely filled with gold, silver, precious gems, and all sorts of cool stuff from the quote-unquote New World, although it wasn't all that new by the 1700s. This was the exact type of ship they'd been looking for, but it was approaching at exactly the worst possible time. As Owen started to call out the alert, the others on deck began to notice the ship as well, and the sailors were already beginning to, curse the misfortune. It would be a miracle to be able to track this ship through the storm. They knew, once the storm hits, it's very... you're basically just trying to stay alive. And they certainly couldn't attack it now, knowing that the storm was bearing down on them. Could they?
Oh, sure.
Of course, some men seemed just eager to attack. They said, despite the bad weather, they're like, fuck it, this is what we're here for, guys. And of course, others were afraid of what would happen if they faced danger of battle and the danger of nature at the same time. But Owen, and more importantly, the captain, were in the former group. They had been on a long trip and they'd had enough already. They wanted to get paid. So they decided to attack. And of course, the westerly winds helped close the gap quickly enough, as it served to provide them with ample speed while obstructing the progress of the other ship. So basically, they were heading with the wind. The other one was heading against it. Because that's one of the things you very much want if you're plundering a ship, is to be able to kind of close that gap before the other ship has time to figure out what their options are.
Pull away,
yeah. The opening volleys went about as ordinary as a pirate sea battle tends to go. It's not, I don't think there's a such thing as just a standard pirate attack, but, aiming the cannons was becoming increasingly difficult with the turbulent water, at long range anyway. Although this was one of those battles that would point something out, that those who had served in the Navy and those who served aboard merchant ships, who tended to be people who had previously served in the Navy, would rarely admit. But though they had an abundance of training, their experience in live battles tends to pale in comparison to that of a pirate crew, given that pirates make their living in battle and honest ships tend to make a living by trying to avoid battle. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's not to say that, these merchant ships were helpless. They had, most of them had seen battle and defended themselves, but pirates were way better at it sometimes. As you mentioned, there were some that were just complete drunken.
The ones the pirates that weren't good at it weren't around very long.
Right. So. By the time Owen's ship had closed into close range, the storm was at full gale. As much as this posed a danger to both ships, it did seem to give the pirates an advantage. Most of the volleys lobbed at them either sailed harmlessly above them or slammed prematurely into the seas between them, because the ships were, it's hard to aim when you're violently pitching up and then back down. Still, Owen did have his own brush with near death when a 10-pound ball came screeching towards his face. According to his own account, the red-hot projectile passed close enough to singe the hairs of his sideburns, but happily just far enough to leave his head and its more solid features wholly intact. So, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Eventually, the merchant vessel had enough of its crew laying wounded or dead on the deck for the pirates to make their move. Normally, you'd tether yourself to the side of the wounded ship with grapples, but in the rough seas, this would pose too much of a risk to both the ships. It was a dangerous job to send men swinging across the gap between the bucking ships, but that's what they decided they had to do. And though they lost 3 men, a sailor named Stockton, a deckhand named Williams, and a mate named Spoons, or who went by Spoons, enough of the crew managed to board the wounded galley to secure the survivors and claim control of the ship, and more importantly, of course, the cargo. But then came the question of what to do next. See, generally, you'd either, claim the ship for yourselves and sail it home, perhaps convincing some of the survivors to join your ranks before disposing, I guess, of the rest. Although Owen was always quick to point out that they'd send such people off in lifeboats or leave them on land somewhere where they'd be likely to be found. They weren't the, just murder and cold blood type of pirates. There's a difference. Yeah. But in its crippled state, they just went through battle and there's a horrible storm raging on. It would be very risky to try to ride out the storm on the wounded ship. And by the time the seas calmed down, who knows where they'd end up. It's not in a condition where you could really steer it. And there was a good chance that, if the storm lasted a day or two, by the time it cleared, they wouldn't be in sight of each other. And that kind of defeats the purpose as well. They could try to tow the ship.
Them splitting up and then like them seeing the boat again and robbing it again.
They're like, fuck, we lost it, but there's one. It's hack. They could try to tow the boat until the seas calm, but that would hinder their ability to, navigate in the storm. And should the captured ship go down, not only would the loot be lost, but it could take them down with it as well. So the decision was made to try to move as much of her cargo aboard, Owen's own vessel as possible. I'm telling this from the point of view of Owen, so I say Owen's ship. He was not the owner of the ship or the captain. He was just a pirate on it. I don't know the name of the ship, though, or the captain. But anyway, they decided to move the cargo over. But that doesn't mean it was the easiest option. Moving tons of freight is dangerous enough. Yeah. Even aboard, gently rolling ship where the weight can shift without warning. But to do it like during a squall was almost suicide, because one wrong move or rogue wave could send like a whole lot of heavy stuff just like toppling violently over. Right. And, in order to lift it from the one boat to the other, you had to be relatively close, and that meant you were working on rain and sea slicked decks, rigging cargo and winching it between the vessels. So not an easy thing, but it was really their best option. And the crews they managed to move much of the cargo, at least for the first 2 hours. But then suddenly the captured ship shuddered violently. Owen was aboard his own vessel. He hadn't swung over to the captured ship. He was helping unload the cargo there, but the impact to the other ship was strong enough that even from their ship, they could tell something was very wrong. It was as if the boat had run aground, which was something, granted, that was entirely possible, because as they're doing all this, you're basically being tossed and blown wherever. And it was possible that they had been pushed into, a sandbar or a reef somewhere. It was, in the moment, pretty hard to know where exactly you were. But it was pretty rare out where they were to run across shallow seas, and Owen didn't know of any such places, though he admits that most of that open sea was not extensively mapped. Owen's ship continued to toss and pitch, though, so at least so far, whatever the other ship had run into they had seemed to have been able to avoid. But suddenly there was another crash, and the sound of breaking timbers shot through the air, like cannon fires, how he described it. The galley was breaking up, and within minutes it had splintered and disappeared below the waves. Not really ideal, especially for the men aboard it. They just figure the weight of the cargo had, probably expedited the ship's sinking as soon as its hull, breached. So the crew had to hurry to secure whatever loose cargo they had and try to search the waters for survivors. They did manage to haul a few of the men out from amid the wreckage, but most disappeared into the inky blackness, the best possible fate if you're a sea person. So Owen's ship would make it out of the storm. Given that he lived to tell this tale, that was probably pretty obvious. And he'd always pause for dramatic effect before reciting the next part. As horrible as those events were, the thing that he said would haunt him for the rest of his life was the ghostly vision that he swears he saw just briefly as lightning flashed overhead, looking up at him from beneath the waves. He said he saw an eye as large as a wagon wheel, wide and completely white, aside from the oil-black pupil that stared unflinchingly at their ship as they sailed away, and the massive tentacles as thick as tree trunks swaying in the current. So according to Owen, it was no uncharted sandbar or deadly reef that took down the ship, but rather a giant, basically the Kraken.
No.
Why it spared him, he'd never know. He said he'd never seen anything like it before, and thank God he never saw anything like it again. But still, when he went to sleep at night, he could picture it as vividly as if it were a freshly painted canvas. So Owen Parfitt, Parfitt's his last name, had lived a hard life. He loved to tell anyone and everyone about it. Most of his stories involved his piracy tales and battles, or tales of all the beautiful women that he'd been with. Most didn't believe his stories. The one I just read was most certainly false because I completely made it up. Huh. But it was a good example of the kind of tales that he would tell. Regardless of how wild his tales were, and also how patently false they probably were, most people humored him. To his credit, Owen himself seemed to know that nobody really believed his stories, or at least not not in full, but it didn't really matter. So basically, Owen was one of these guys that I've got clients like, and you work retail, you probably do too, especially the elderly ones that just like to tell stories.
Yeah.
What I don't know is if he was just like to tell tales and he was just genuinely like tell tall tales. He was just a storyteller. Or I've got a client like this who swears he was the bodyguard for JFK and that the FBI used to use him as an informant, but now they hate him, and that the local police department, like, he's genuinely like just crazy, and he believes the story. So I don't know which one Owen was, but one of the two.
I mean, like, you know, it could also be like a Wyatt Earp thing, you know, like old cowboys where there's like grains of truth to the stories, but like embellished to, you know, sort of raise up your own biographical narrative, you know?
Yeah. And again, I'll point out that he lived in the 1700s. He told tall tales about adventure and daring and piracy. Again, I completely fucking made up that story because I needed something to make. But I feel it was probably a pretty good example, although much more colorfully and much more as like a old sea salt would tell it.
Yeah.
And I could even kind of picture my grandpa, like he would tell it in jest, like he wouldn't try to pass it off as real. But he liked to tell stories like that. Although he had always told us, he died when I was pretty young, but he served in the Navy on submarines in World War II. And I remember him telling us a story about their submarine. And it wasn't during battle, but they were running drills or whatever, getting stuck at the bottom of the ocean. You know, they got grounded on basically a sandbar, but like 60 feet down, like far enough down that you weren't ever going to be able to just open the hatches and whatever. And he said they were stuck for like 3 days, and then they managed to get freed. And of course he survived. But I always kind of thought that might be one of those tall tales until I came across it in a book about World War II submarine history, and they talked about it. And I'm like, oh fuck, that was real.
Yeah.
So like you said, it was probably a mix. Although it's hard to tell, you know, 250 years after the fact if he ever actually even was a pirate.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
anyway,
I don't have problems with people like being storytelling, you know, bullshitters, because that's the fun, you know. That's the whole premise of the show.
Yeah, as long as they're not trying to like cheat you out of something or like screw you over, like lie to you that way. Like, I don't care if you embellish a story or make it up.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's fine. I don't mind a bullshitter. I have a big problem with con men. But, you know, I mean, fuck, like, you know, it's like my dad used to always tell me stories that were like 90% bullshit. And it's like, we did the creepypasta episode where you and me each wrote our own. I think it was episode 50. And my story was loosely based off a story he told me about kind of driving out into the middle of nowhere in the desert to do a thing. But in real life, I know he didn't do anything. He probably sat in the desert and ate Burger King, and nothing happened. And then he went home.
That sounds pretty awesome to me right now, frankly. But yeah,
that's you know. But you embellish it because it's a long drive. We need to talk. Keep our minds busy.
So, but anyway, there's more. What was true was that in the 1760s, by the 1760s, Owen had lived a pretty hard life. He was in his 60s. And I don't know if it was from like a hard life of actual piracy and sea life, or a hard life of just destitution or labor, or simply from aging or medical issues. But by the 1760s, Owen found himself nearly fully paralyzed. He was in very bad shape medically. Like, he was still all there mentally, but he could not move on his own. You know, it sounds like he had a little bit of motion in his arms, but not enough to, like, he couldn't move around with it. He couldn't crawl with his arms or anything. He lived with his sister Susanna in the southwest English town of Shepton Mallet, or Mallet. I don't know how the English pronounce stuff. One afternoon,
but
it's probably Mallet. It's probably Mallet if it was French, but it's not French. It's English. One afternoon, possibly in 1968 or 1969, depending on the source, Owen asked to sit on the patio so that he could enjoy the nice weather. And this part is all true. This is the real story here. With the help of a neighbor, his sister carried him to his chair on the porch. And then, you know, the neighbor theoretically, I guess, went back home, and his sister went back inside to continue cooking and doing chores. But as evening drew close, a storm seemed to be building in the distance, so Susanna went outside to retrieve her brother. To her shock and horror, he was nowhere to be found. She knew he couldn't have possibly wandered off on his own. Again, his condition left him completely immobile. I think he could roll his head and he could talk, but he was not walking away. She hadn't seen or heard anybody come up to the home, and they lived in a pretty kind of rural area, so one of those where you tend to notice if somebody comes up your drive and onto your porch, although, we all miss stuff. Mm-hmm. But there were some farm workers working the fields across from their house. She asked them if they'd seen anybody coming or going from the property, but they had not. They hadn't seen where he had gone to either. It's one of those, you're working the fields. You might have noticed him at one point there and one point not, but you don't think anything of it. So they said they hadn't seen anybody come or go, but they did help her and along with a couple neighbors form a search party to go looking for him. But he was never found, which provides the most interesting mystery to how a paraplegic who loved to tell stories could just suddenly go missing off of his porch. So that was back in the 1760s. In the 1970s, during some construction in the area near where Owen went missing, workers did find some skeletal remains. Of course, everybody immediately thought, oh, that's the body of Owen. I wonder, what happened to him, how he got there. Although examiners quickly determined that the remains belonged to a young woman and not an old man. And apparently nobody really cared about that.
The other, it was a coin flip, really.
Well, the funny part is the way the story goes. It's like, oh, this must be Owen. And then they're like, no, it was a young girl. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we don't care who she is then.
Oh, thank God.
There's no mystery there. She probably wasn't even paralyzed.
At least it's not old paralyzed, dude. Whew.
So, to this day, nobody knows what happened to Owen, and given that he disappeared over 250 years ago, we probably never will. But that's the story I came across that was really, really interesting to me. Because there's all sorts of mysterious disappearances, but this one, it's relatively well known, but it's not as famous as something like, I don't know, the Lindbergh baby or something like that. Maybe it's better known in England since that's where it originates. But you can't help but wonder, something clearly happened. And it's like, well, was his sister involved? Maybe she was tired of having to take care of her paralyzed brother, although I didn't see anything suggesting that she was suspected of that. There were theories at the time, and of course they persist to this day because they're the best theories, that maybe his piracy stories weren't completely fake, and some old pirate, acquaintances or just people familiar with them, kidnapped him so that he could, show him where the buried treasure was, something like that. But I don't know. He just told some really great tales. Maybe or maybe didn't fight a kraken, and then vanished into thin air.
And gave Steve a sweet screenplay option.
And apparently he invented an okay but overrated dessert, the parfait. They're fine, but I feel like people think if you layer stuff, it makes it fancy automatically, and that's not true.
Yeah. If you layer shit right, then, well, it's not. Yeah, I would say it's never really fancy, but it can be amazing.
Yeah, but I'm lazy. Just go ahead, blend it all up ahead of time, and I'll just shovel it into my face.
Yeah, just shove it in a blender, put it in one of those beer dispenser hats, and let you suck it through a straw.
Don't make me go shoveling through your dessert to get to the parts I want. But yeah, that's what I got. So
these are, I always thought the Kraken was an interesting, myth. We've done sort of cryptozoology based monsters and stuff on the show, and I think anything deep sea related is very interesting because that's the one area where on the planet where we can't really. Yeah,
theoretically, it's possible to have a giant creature.
The Loch Ness Monster is bullshit because where that is, there's just there's no way an animal that big could sustain itself.
No, without some kind of trace that it's there.
Without a trace that it's there, and also just they know the rest of the wildlife in there, so it's not enough to keep something that big alive.
Although I've seen other theories crop up say, well, yeah, but maybe there's some underwater tunnel they don't know about that leads out to the ocean, and it just comes there for visits.
I'm pretty sure they scan the whole lock.
Pretty well.
But
it's one of those where it's one of those places on Earth where it's just I want to say it's hundreds of feet deep at certain spots, so it still does leave enough for. Like I say, it's not likely, and I think a scientist that's going to tell you like the odds of something being true is going to say, yeah, there's like a 0.0001% chance that maybe there could be a tunnel in system, whatever. But there's enough of that mystery there that they can't explore it all.
And that was what I was going to say, is like the ocean itself, like there are those points where it's so deep that like, you know, it's still a mystery to us. And that's kind of interesting. It's like, you know, we still have scientists doing what they can to research the depths of the earth, but you know, it's fucking pitch black down there, and
right.
You know, there's just tons of shit we haven't identified. I don't know why it's like, to me, it's the most human thing to do, of like, oh shit, anything could be down there, even a giant version of this thing we already have. As far as storytelling, that shit sucks. But it's always it's a
that's
big
a good point.
squid.
Like, it's never like a giant turtle or a giant seahorse. It's a giant squid, something scary and impressive. Yeah, now I like the idea of like a seahorse the size of a fucking elephant. Like, it doesn't do no harm to nobody because it's a seahorse, but it's huge. Like,
what if it's just a bunch of like grown man sized shrimp down there?
Yeah.
That would be fucking eerie.
Oh yeah, shrimp are terrifying. Like, I was watching a show the other day about, I think it was the Blue Planet or one of those. I'm a sucker for those. But they were talking about the like tiger prawn, I think, or one of these relatively large shrimp to begin with. But then, of course, they're showing all the videos zoomed in, so you don't get a huge sense of scale. And those fuckers are terrifying. Like a human-sized shrimp, that might scare me more than a kraken. No, probably not. But
no, I mean, like I said, it would just be eerier. Yeah. Like my mind has seen enough in fiction to wrap its head around like a giant squid. I would not be prepared for a big shrimp.
Giant shrimp. Well, that's what's so cool to me about the kraken is I think it's a cool,
that's a cool monster,
mythological creature. But we have found like 80-foot long giant squid remains, and it's like maybe they're not quite to the scale where they're like wrapping around a Spanish galleon and pulling it to the depths, but
there are some big fuckers.
Yeah, I mean, if you were in a little rowboat and you looked down and saw something that was like 8 times as long as your boat and it was a squid, you wouldn't be like, I want to pet it. You'd be like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's probably why we get the myth of the kraken and not the myth of the...
I mean, how long have fishermen have been exaggerating the size of shit they've caught? Right. So, of course, over years and years and, centuries of like naval storytelling, of course, the squids will get bigger too. But
especially when you shit yourself and then you're trying to relate to your buddies on land why you shit yourself, but then what you start explaining to somebody on land doesn't sound maybe that terrifying. Yeah. You gotta
you gotta weigh the pros and cons of what you go with there. And it's like you say, I was that scared of the giant squid, then you look like a bitch, so you kind of have to be like, I wasn't scared at all, I just felt like pooping my pants.
It squeezed it out of me, but right before I punched it in the face with my bare knuckles.
I actually shit myself all the time. It's not a big deal.
It's what you do at sea. I mean, you don't do it. That's how you turn things around. And somebody looks at you like, when somebody's like, you do that, you say, you don't? And then suddenly they feel insecure.
Everybody knows Kraken can't stand the smell of shit in your pants, dude. It's like, get with the program. That's you pulled the old Steve Gibson shim sham on me by
what it 100% was
story fraud.
I loved the disappearance because it was very mysterious, but it takes 30 seconds to say this guy that couldn't walk disappeared and was never found. So I thought, well, I was going to do like a compilation because there's some other disappearances that I'll probably cover in future episodes. But I thought, what's more fun? I've always kind of wanted to...
What if I make up their life?
I was about to say that. Like, I've always kind of wanted to like explore with the idea of taking what you said basically about like your dad's story is taking something that really happened, but then writing a fiction around it, and not trying to pass it off as real because that's bullshit. But like, although some like that, I find it more fun to not reveal that it's fake until the end. Otherwise, the whole time you're listening to me, like, yeah, why are you talking about pirate trade routes and stuff?
Yeah.
But
I think that's what upsets me the most about what you've done here is you spent so much time on the geography and shit. And it's like, if you're making it up, you didn't have to go that far.
You want to know something that's sad? I literally looked up 1700s shipping routes so that I could find the right areas of the ocean to talk about.
Only to debunk yourself at the end and be like, I made it all up. Haha.
I was probably still wrong about it, too. If people are like, pirates didn't hunt in the equator between Africa. That would be fucking suicide. It's too hot.
Steve's like just playing this long con on me and the listeners, and we don't care. Yeah. Just like get to the fucking fish part.
They could have been fighting on Mars. I don't. It doesn't
when
matter.
does the pirate shit start? It's like, hang on, I'm building a world here. But no, that was
so look for my book, Owen Parfitt. I got to change the name slightly so the family doesn't get royalties. Owen Parfitt fights a kraken while cooking desserts
by making a lackluster dessert.
So yeah, that's all I got. I'm done.
Sounds good. I'm done too. Fuck this. I gotta do a full fucking cleaning of my desk now. I'm sticky. I'm pissed. You lied to me. I'm going home.
In my mind, again, I'm going to pull the Owen thing. When I'm old and I'm telling the story about this one specific podcast episode, I'm going to say that you were pissed and sticky because of the story and not because of...
Yeah, just as it was wrapping up, a kraken attacked me and covered me in fucking kraken goop or whatever kraken do. I assume they do that. All right, bye. Fuck it. Bye.
Toodaloo. Until next week, when we will meet again.
God damn, we can't end shit.